The Rising of the Shield Hero Season 4 has now reached its conclusion, and you'd be surprised just how many people did not know this season even existed. And the only reason why some people even started talking about it all of a sudden was because of its announcement that Season 5 was confirmed for this series. And while many people can just speculate that the reason why the Rising of the Shield Hero was not talked about throughout the summer season was because of just the amount of good animes that were coming out this season, the reality is that the Rising of the Shield Hero has massively fell off. And there's a reason why the Rising of the Shield Hero has been barely talked about despite the amount of season it's been getting, and the reason being is because of its story. When it comes to storytelling, it's not only important that your story is interesting and it's something that a lot of people will want to spend their time reading or watching, but it's also important for that story to still have the elements that made it interesting. Despite the numerous arcs and despite the numerous character development, the core themes or the core points of the story are still there, because while there's nothing wrong with the story changing based on what happens in that story, it's also important that you still have the plot points that are the main reason why many people became interested in the story in the first place. When you watch or read Re:Zero, while the story constantly changes and we see world building and we see Subaru meeting new characters and new locations, the main points of the story are still there. Even though Subaru is starting to get used to the new world that he is now in, he still has to survive everything that this world has, because in this new world that Subaru is in is still filled with so many dark things and so many terrifying creatures and people that this is a world that is not surprising when you hear people say that this is a world they wouldn't want to be part of. But this scenario doesn't just happen in these serious and complex stories, as even the lighthearted stories also still try their very best to still have the main reason as to why people were interested in their story in the first place. Series like Konosuba, where many people have enjoyed Konosuba and have kept it in their radar, is because of their comedy. While Konosuba has had its moments where it does become serious and sometimes even emotional, the main thing, this being the comedy, is still there. They still try to sprinkle in comedy throughout the story, and that's why so many people have enjoyed it despite the many events that have happened in Konosuba. So when it comes to the Rising of the Shield Hero, one of the main reasons as to why this story became so interesting to so many people and why so many people tuned in the first place is because in the beginning a lot of people felt that the Rising of the Shield Hero was an underdog story where we see our protagonist Naofumi Iwatani get sent to another world only for him to quickly realize that he's not going to get treated fairly, as even though he has become one of the 4 legendary heroes who are viewed as saviors in the kingdom of Melromark and were summoned to save the kingdom from these things called the waves of catastrophe, Naofumi however doesn't get the same treatment as the other heroes, all because he is the shield hero. He gets ridiculed by not just the other heroes but by the kingdom's people as well. So already things are not looking good for Naofumi, but things will only get worse, as just when it seems like he found somebody that isn't going to treat him like garbage, this being a woman named Malti Melromark, the sad reality is that was far from the case, as after Malti was done taking advantage of Naofumi, she would betray him right away by accusing him of assaulting her, and because of these false accusations, this ruined Naofumi's reputation even more, but this also caused Naofumi to start having a hatred for the world that now he was part of. And throughout the entirety of the first season, we just see how miserable Naofumi is. He's bitter, he's frustrated, but most importantly how traumatized he is because of everything that happened to him. For the first season, we see Naofumi question why was he being treated like this. Was it just because he was the shield hero, or was there something else? And even though he did get new companions and people that did want to help him like Raftalia and Philo, even though he did have trust in them, it didn't mean that he was going to trust everybody that tried giving him a helping hand or were being good to him. He was very guarded, and you can't really blame him, as due to him being betrayed one time because of someone he thought had his back, the last thing he wants is to relive that same experience once again. It's moments like this that are the reason why season 1 was so impactful, because while you did feel bad for Naofumi, you also wanted him to keep going forward. You wanted him to be able to not only get revenge on Malti for the false accusations, but you also wanted him to get back at the people that view him as trash, like the king of this kingdom, where no matter what Naofumi did, even if his intentions were very crystal clear, everything he was doing, whether it was saving the kingdom from the waves of catastrophe or showing that he was much more useful compared to the other heroes that they were confident would be much more better than him, nothing mattered to the king, because no matter what Naofumi did, he didn't view it as anything special or anything that he should praise him for. And it's why we were able to sympathize with Naofumi, because you could tell that every time he did something good, it always frustrated him how he never got any respect because of it. It always seemed that all his efforts were for nothing, which is why so many people were becoming more interested as the story continued, because you wanted Naofumi to prove all those people wrong. You wanted Naofumi to show the world that he wasn't just this guy that was beneath everyone else. He was much more than that. But at the same time, you also wanted Naofumi to get revenge on Malty and the king for everything that they put him through, which is exactly what would happen towards the end of season 1, as not only would Malty's lies be exposed, which would save Naofumi's reputation from being seen as this disgusting human being, but also the king will also be put in his place and would just have to accept the fact that Naofumi was here to stay and that he had no intentions of being seen as the useless hero, all because he was the shield hero. And while still to this day many people argue whether or not it was the right decision for Naofumi to spare Malty and the king for everything that they did to him, it was still a conclusion that many people were waiting to see happen, and that is Naofumi finally getting payback to the people who have wronged him this entire season. But here's the beginning of the problems, as while this was for many a solid conclusion, a new question started to be created. What will be next for the rising of the shield hero? Since Naofumi was able to get his revenge and be able to fix his reputation by the end of it, what's next for Naofumi and his entire crew? And that's where we get to season 2, and to say that season 2 was a drop in quality compared to season 1 would be an understatement. Now obviously the biggest reason why so many people are not fans of the Rising of the Shield Hero season 2 is because of the animation. For whatever reason, this season decided to have probably one of the worst looking CGIs to be animated in an anime. But I think also when it comes to the drop in quality, it's not just the animation, it's also the story. When it comes to season 2, it really just revolved around Naofumi and his crew trying to stop this giant turtle, and it's also in this season where we get new characters. But the problem is that everything that was happening in this season was so underdeveloped that many people did not really know everything about this arc and all the context, which isn't surprising to hear, because many people who have read the light novels of the Rising of the Shield Hero will come out and say that the anime did cut a lot of content from the light novels, which not only could have fixed the pacing of season 2, but it also gave us a lot of many details that are really important for the story, and that could explain why this season felt so rushed and just very underwhelming, because it just wasn't adapted correctly. But many anime viewers still had hope that maybe the next season would be better, because sure, while season 2 was bad, maybe season 3 will be much more better. Well, unfortunately, this was not the case either, because in season 3, it mainly focused on two specific things. The first being is that Naofumi is tasked to find out what happened to the other heroes, since it will be revealed that the other heroes have basically disappeared and no one knows exactly what happened to them. So not only does Naofumi have to find them, but he also has to work together with them to be able to fight off another massive threat. But it's also in this season as well that Naofumi tries to also tackle the issue of slavery of the demi-humans, and in order to get the money to free these slaves, Naofumi and as well as the other members of his group go to underground Colosseum brawls in order to get that money. And you could tell right away just by me describing basically what the seasons have to offer that this feels like a completely different story from what we were witnessing in the first season of the Rising of the Shield Hero. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons why so many people really just did not care as the anime continued about the Rising of the Shield Hero, and it's because it doesn't really feel like the story that we once were interested in, a story of seeing someone be able to move forward after everything they've been put through and everything that they have had to deal with, whether it was ridiculous or not, to now just simply becoming just another typical isekai story of the protagonist doing all these good things, and then because of that, as his journey continues, he gets support left and right, and while there may be some conflict, it doesn't matter because the protagonist already knows what to do and already knows how to handle the situation. While that's not a bad thing if this was just another typical isekai story, this was not what originally was the Rising of the Shield Hero. In the beginning, there were just so many elements in the story that made the Rising of the Shield Hero stand out from the other isekais, and there's a reason why so many people were hoping, despite the drastic changes in the story, there were still going to be a few elements that still remained from season 1, only that never happened because it just seems that the story really had no idea what it was trying to be. It couldn't be an underdog story anymore because Naofumi half the time from now on just knows what he's doing and always has a plan for any kind of problem that may occur, and that's the one thing that I feel like a lot of people really did not like when it came to these new seasons, is that Naofumi no longer felt like somebody that was struggling in this new world, because that's just the many things that made Naofumi for so many people an interesting character. Because Naofumi, no matter the hardships he faced, no matter how much he's suffering, he was always trying to be strong and be there for the people that he actually did care for. Even though he was suffering, even though he was obviously traumatized for what had happened to him, he was still always trying to figure out what to do and hoping that the next day will be a much more better day. It also doesn't help that Naofumi's trauma is basically non-existent in these new seasons, because beforehand in season 1 it was heavily displayed a lot how the false accusations severely affected Naofumi, but now it just seems that either Naofumi has completely forgotten about those moments or just chooses to ignore them, which is not really a good idea because Naofumi was such a grounded character. So the fact that there's never a point in these future seasons where we see Naofumi look back after everything he went through or reminisce how his life was compared to now, I don't know, it's just something about that really just makes it seem that everything he went through has been now just simply brushed aside just because everything seems to have been resolved in the first season. It also doesn't help either that most of the characters of the newer seasons are just not that interesting. There's nothing wrong with having a large cast of characters, but I feel like with the problem with having too many characters in the series is that you're not always going to have enough time to really give us actual reasons to care for these characters. I mean, the whole situation with Naofumi trying to find the other heroes that disappeared, I mean, you just really don't care, not just because how they treated Naofumi, but also because they're just not interesting characters. I mean, they try to give us some backstory and some information about them, but who really cares? And this even happens with some of the characters that have been well established, like Raftalia, because in season 4 it's a continuation of season 3, because during season 3 it's revealed that Raftalia is from a royal family and now there are assassins that are trying to get her, and season 4 heavily focuses on Naofumi trying to get help and get new allies to deal with this problem, and then they deal with even more problems when they go to this kingdom called Siltwell Kingdom, in which Naofumi is seen as a god, since in this kingdom the shield hero is viewed very highly. But this also has its own set of problems because it seems that the people in this kingdom have no intentions of fulfilling Naofumi's wishes. That's essentially season 4 in a nutshell. It was not easy to watch because it just felt so boring to me, the amount of breaks I took when watching these episodes, because it's just simply not the same series that I actually got interested when watching season 1. There was a lot of wasted potential when it came to the Rising of the Shield Hero, because I feel like had they just simply gone with the more grounded approach instead of just simply focusing on the isekai elements, I feel like this story could have been a very solid story, and who knows, maybe people would have been talking about this series more instead of just forgetting about it and only remembering once a new season has been announced. But you know, there have been many other stories that have had a lot of potential only for them to get worse as the story continues, and that's where the Rising of the Shield Hero is at right now, and that's where I'm going to end today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.